Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Consistency Corner podcast. I am excited to chat with you guys today and talk about content repurposing. And here's the thing that I want to maybe remind you about when it comes to content repurposing. It's not about in your brand and your messaging having 87 different things to say. It's about having a few things to say and finding 87 different ways to say it. Because in the crazy attention world that we're living in, where we have more content and information coming at us in one day than people 100 years ago had in their entire lives. I don't remember where I heard that stat, so please don't quote me on that, but I heard it on a podcast recently. We have so much content coming at us. So from a business owner perspective and a messaging and a communication perspective, you have to say the same thing over and over and over again. But we also have to say it in different ways in order for our audience to connect with it, for them to get it, for it to vibe with different people. Think about your own children. You have to tell them something over and over again before they finally listen. And sometimes when you say it like that one different way, that's when they listen. And the same is true in our content and creating authority and consistency in our messaging. The good news is content repurposing can help you do that without feeling like you're on a hamster wheel of content creation. And in fact, after doing the work and creating long form content for a good amount of time, like I'm going to say a year or so, what you'll find is that content creation becomes so much easier because you now have a bank of content that you can repurpose. But if you're in the early stages of creating long form content, or you're like, Ruthie, I don't even know what you mean by long form content, we're going to talk about it. And I'm going to talk to you about why I'm so passionate about business owners having a long form content source as the base of their overall marketing strategy. And content repurposing is one of those reasons. So when I say long form content, what do I mean? I mean a blog, I mean a podcast, I mean a video. It could also be a email newsletter or email series, but it's something longer than a social media post. It is something where you can tell a story, explain different points, create analogies. You guys know I love a good analogy. But it's something that's not just like a one-liner or a short, bingeable type of content container like we see on social media. It's a little bit meatier, and it takes your client through a journey, and it adds value in a way that either entertains, educates, inspires, motivates, or informs, right? And we've talked here on the podcast about how long form content can be used in both the attract stage and the nurture stage of the marketing funnel. And quite honestly, it could potentially be used as a convert piece too. But the bulk of your long form content is going to be nurture content with some strategies around attract as well. But you can take that long form content and slice and dice it into several other pieces to fill the other parts of the funnel. And we're going to talk about some frameworks to do that now. So, first of all, what's a framework? A framework is like a recipe. It's a way to follow a plan so you don't just feel like you're throwing spaghetti at the wall. And it helps with organizing your thoughts. It helps with decision fatigue. It helps with giving you a roadmap or a plan for what to do so that you don't feel overwhelmed. So, I'm going to share my screen. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, if you are listening on the podcast and you are not able to see my screen, know that we also do the Consistency Corner podcast over on YouTube now. And so you can take a look over there to see some different things that I'm sharing, but I'll talk about it as well. So we're going to talk about four posts to repurpose from a long form content piece. So we've already talked about long form content. It's a blog, it's a podcast, it's a video, or an email newsletter, maybe. So post number one, this is a social media post that you can create. And this could be a reel, this could be a story, this could be a just static post or carousel post. But it's to pull out the thought-provoking or polarizing idea from that long-form content piece. And you want to do that in like one of those tweet style reels, or you want to do it as a carousel post, like it's like a quote, or even just a single image post that's a quote. You could also do it as a photo, like a static photo of something that kind of tells the story visually. And then you do that thought provoking or polarizing idea in the caption. You could also do it as a voiceover reel. So you have like B-roll video and you just record voiceover, you talking, saying this thought provoking or polarizing idea. So, what's an example of that? Okay, well, here's an example. Here on the podcast, I talk to you guys all the time about social media is not a marketing strategy, it's a container for your content, just like a coffee cup is not coffee. It's a container for your coffee. So that's a thought provoking or a polarizing idea. I could do an entire podcast on that, which I have, but then also I can turn that into additional content pieces and talk about it to share that point or that polarizing or thought provoking idea. And one of the things that you can do with AI, which is a awesome tool to be able to use to get your wheels turning and give you prompts, is when you write a blog post or you pull the transcript from a podcast that you've recorded or a video that we've recorded where you've talked about something that is one of your content pillars or themes, you can input that into AI and say, please help me create social media posts from this content. I would like one to be a quote post of a thought provoking or polarizing idea from this copy that I'm giving you. And then AI helps you. And so you're not, banging your head against the wall trying to figure it out. Now, the second thing we can do with long form content, and this is similar to one of the things that I said in the last one, the thought provoking idea, but a photo with a transformation story. So let's say I have a long form content piece about the marketing funnel, right? And how we need to be constantly thinking about attract, nurture, and convert, and the activities that we're doing to move customers through the marketing funnel. That's a long form content piece. It's longer for me. But what I could do is I could have a photo of, let's say, one of my clients, or I could have a photo of even like myself working, at my computer, like just as an example. And then I could tell a story in the caption about how once I started focusing on the marketing funnel and both filling the top, nurturing in the middle, and doing conversion driving activities at the end, my business started to grow. And so it's a story pulled from that long form content piece. And it might even be a story that I have in the long form content piece, but it's shortened slightly for the social media post. And you can take that social media post and you can have a call to action to go and listen to the podcast or read the blog where you share more details, or that can just be it. And the call to action can be, does this resonate with you? What questions do you have? Share if you agree. Share, comment if this has you thinking differently or something like that. But again, it's content that you've already created long form, and you're just repackaging it and repurposing it into a transformation style post. The third option is a quote. Everybody loves a quote graphic. I mean, seriously, it's like the number one saved and shared type of content on social media. So take a quote that you wrote or said from your long form piece of content and create a quote card or a quote graphic or that tweet style reel. Now, the difference between a quote and a polarizing topic or like thought provoking. So the difference between number one and this one is the quote, in my opinion, could be a little bit longer, or it doesn't necessarily have to be thought provoking, but it could be like validating, or it could be educational, but it's 1 to 2 sentences attributed as a quote. And you share that as copy and as text. And then again, the caption for that social media content piece, which is a shorter version of your long form piece, is a call to action to go and read or listen to the longer form content. Or it could be something completely different. It could be a call to action to work with you. It could be a call to action to engage. It could be a call to action to get a free resource if this is resonating with you. Or it could be a call to action, like commenting or sharing. So you can do a lot of things and package it a lot of different ways. The fourth one is a teaching post. And this is probably going to be a carousel, but it could also be kind of like a checklist in stories or a step-by-step infographic where you kind of walk somebody through how to do something. So again, you're going to that long form content piece where you added value and you're creating like a step-by-step process that this is what I'm teaching you in this long form content piece. Here's how you follow it. Now, because you're putting this on social media, it's probably simplified. And so again, your call to action could be check the long form piece for more details, or it could be comment if this was helpful. Let me know if this helps. Save this post for the next time you do XYZ. We all know, at least I think we do at this point, that the tips and hacks we see on social media are the tip of the iceberg. Like, for the most part, if you're listening to this podcast, I think you are smart enough to know that the tips and hacks that the gurus are telling us are not the whole story. It's part of the story. It's one piece that can help, but it's not going to like totally change the world overnight if you just do that one thing and that one thing only, right? And that's what your teaching posts can do, is they're giving the little snippet, but then you're inviting the reader in to work with you and to learn more. And you're creating that curiosity to understand like the whole system or the entire transformation process of working with you. So that gave you 4 pieces of content from one long form content piece. And quite honestly, what most of you can probably do is you can probably do 2 or 3 of each of those types of posts. And again, our friend AI can certainly help you when you prompt it and say, I'm going to give you some long form content. Here is some, a transcript from a podcast. Here's some copy from a blog post. Please help me create 4 types of social media graphics or posts with these intentions, or help me create 4 quote posts. Canva's batch create, which I'm not going to try to explain how to do because I'm not the expert, but I will tell you the Creative Bodega teaches this. Batch create is a great way where you can inside Canva literally create up to like 20 quote posts at once. So you make a spreadsheet, you have all your quotes in there, and you can pull those from your long form content piece. And then you can make like 20 of them in like 5 seconds in Canva. So that's a great way to get some volume in your content out there and work smarter, not harder. So now we're going to talk about one other kind of framework in terms of just like one type of post, but in taking long form content and turning it into multiple pieces of content across multiple platforms so that we can amplify our message without doing more work. It is more work. Yes, you have to repurpose it, and repurposing is work, but it's less work than starting from scratch every single time for all these different types of pieces of content. And the caveat I will also say is that as I teach you this framework or this kind of web of repurposing, is start with one. And as we go through the steps, you can kind of think about which one you're doing now or you'd like to start with. And then when you get consistent with that piece, you can layer on more. So let me kind of give you some examples for what I do. So I started my podcast in 2021. So summer of 2021. And the very first thing I did with my podcast is I would take that podcast and I would create a sound bite. And I do this in Buzzsprout, which is where I host my podcast, but there's a lot of different ways you can do it. But I create a little sound bite clip that I would share as an Instagram reel. And that was how I would repurpose the podcast for social media. I still do that to this day. I could also post that reel on LinkedIn and I could post it on TikTok. Now, I personally have given up on TikTok. I just don't have the bandwidth for it or the desire to be over there right now. And LinkedIn, I today remember about 30% of the time to repurpose my reel onto LinkedIn. So what I'm telling you is like, I'm super consistent in creating the reel. I'm not super consistent as doing the next step of content repurposing, but I do it sometimes. And as I create capacity and space in my business, that'll be something that we will work on getting more consistent at. But the bottom line is I have that soundbite from the podcast. We create a soundbite. We create it as a LinkedIn post. Now we've taken it a step further after about a year and a half of podcasting. and started doing a second post or a second reel or a quote post. So it was a quote post for a while. Now it's a quote reel because I'm not currently doing static posts with my 9-grid strategy. But so now every single podcast is becoming 2 social media posts. One is talking, one is reading a quote with trending audio behind it. On the other side of that, we can also take the podcast, and we do take the podcast, and we turn it into a blog post. And so I can capture content through people who find my website through search engines. The blogs are optimized for search engines. We choose keywords based upon what we're talking about in the podcast, and then we transcribe the podcast into a blog post. So you can read what I'm saying. So if you're the type of person who likes to read, you can consume the content that way. Or it gives you another way to find the content because you're finding it through search engines that are reading copy versus podcast platforms that are just hearing it. Now, in addition to that blog post, we take the content from the blog and we create pins and put them on Pinterest to drive traffic back to the blog through Pinterest. I also can do LinkedIn posts or Facebook posts, since you can put a link directly in Facebook and LinkedIn, and I can drive people back to the blog by adding value with those long form content pieces in, for someone who's looking to read versus listen, right? And then also Pinterest pins are very similar in size to stories. So if we create Pinterest pins, I can literally repurpose those straight to Instagram and use them in stories. And so I'm getting more bang for my buck for that piece of content. Now with the podcast, I also create an email each week. So one of my emails each week is, here's what we're talking about on the podcast. Here's some links to connect with a guest. Here's some additional resources for you. Go listen if you haven't already. And it's just like a reminder and a way for me to connect with my audience and add value through email. And then finally, I could take that same podcast topic, and like we talked about, I can make those posts that we just went over, those 4 types of posts: transformational story with a photo, carousel post, quote, and polarizing idea or thought-provoking headline. And I could create posts out of all 4 of those. Now, today, I'm not. I have done that in the past. I'm currently in a season of creating less short form social media content and more long form content, but I now have the opportunity to do that. And even if I don't do it in the moment, here's the thing, because I'm creating this long form content that's going to live on forever, I could repurpose this content later. So I could have a podcast published in August, and then in November, be like, you know what? I talked about that on a podcast and it really resonated. I'm starting to have conversations with people about it. I think this would help my community. I'm going to go back and pull from that content to create some social media content or to write another email newsletter. And then with long form content, here's a real sweet spot. Because that long form content lives on, and it lives on in a platform that you own, you can use that long form content to nurture the relationship with your current clients and leads by pointing them back to content that will serve them through email nurture sequences, courses, or communication or checklists on your website, or even that you send directly to clients that you work with. It's like, here's all this content that I've already created in the past. And that content is going to keep working for me because it's going to keep serving new people that come into my audience and into my sphere, because I'm networking and focusing on attract as well. But that nurture content already exists. So I hope that has given you some different things to think about, some ways to think about content repurposing in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming, because I get it. It feels like a lot at first. And I want to encourage you to start with the long form content. If you're not already, start. Even if it's just a meteor email newsletter. And know that over time, as you build and have the compound effect from creating long form content, that it will get easier. And it will get to the point that you feel more confident, but you've got to start somewhere. And if you are already creating long form content, keep going. Keep doing it, because it is going to serve you for the long run, it's going to serve your clients. You're building a foundation and a legacy of content that is going to support you now and into the future, and that will eventually make your content creation strategy simpler, but it takes some work up front. If you have questions about content repurposing, don't hesitate to send me a DM over on Instagram. I would love to chat more with you about it and answer your questions. And know that this is something that we regularly talk about inside the Consistent Content Club. And so I'd love to have you in the club to get some of those content prompts, and then we can have specific conversations about how you can repurpose the prompts for different platforms, different messages, and different types of content for your business so that you can work smarter, not harder, and use content to build authority and relationships and trust with your audience, because you know that those relationships are what lead to sales and success in your business. Thank you guys so much for being here on this week's episode, and we will chat again soon.